The narrative commences within a grand estate where young women are being auctioned to affluent elderly gentlemen for exorbitant sums, each of these buyers being unequivocally the private individual will merit nothing less than the miss. Yet, regrettably, in this harsh and unforgiving world, only financial power holds sway. A dark-haired maiden begins to weep over her grim destiny, bewildered as to why a divine power would place her in such a cruel existence. But a stunning silver-haired girl named Dia offers comfort. Dia instructs her to compose herself, maintain a beautiful appearance, and refrain from crying. With that, Dia is summoned to the stage for presentation, and she proceeds with an air of composure. Softly humming to herself, she is introduced as the evening as premier offering, with initial bids commencing at a staggering $10 million. Nearly every attendee at the auction begins to bid for Dia, each eager to possess a silver-haired girl. Dia, however, simply smiles and employs her magic to first conjure a key for her restraint. Immediately thereafter, she manifests a rifle through sorcery and begins discharging it into the crowd. Pandemonium erupts as people scatter in terror, while security personnel rush to restrain the girl. Back in the dining area, the other young women are bewildered by the abrupt disturbance. However, before the guard could intervene, a girl named Tar, posing as a domestic worker, shatters a bottle over his skull, rendering him unconscious. She pivots to fend two additional guards positioned in the entrance, while promptly brandishes their blades. Tart resolves to escalate the situation, producing a spear from an unexpected place and engaging the two with impressive flying, effortlessly evading their assault and vanquishing them. Securing the key, she tosses them to the other girls, urging them to escape, while she swiftly advances towards the primary hall. Dia continues her barrage, targeting all in her path, when her gaze lands upon the principal madam, the orchestrator of the auction, and the one responsible for abducting the girls after devastating their home village. She attempts a swift shot at the madam but is toward the sword attack, which she narrowly deflects with her rifle before being knocked to the floor. She comprehended that this guard also possesses arcane abilities. Before he can launch another assault, Tartle emerges, fending him off with her spear, just as additional security personnel begin to converge. Tart swiftly repels him, seizes her revolver, and systematically eliminates the incoming guards. Both Dia and Tart converge on the stage, weapons poised yet. The sheer number of guards that overwhelms the duo. Dia concludes that a powerful area of effect magical assault is necessary for their survival and escape. Consequently, she instructs Tart to repel the adversaries while she commences her incantation. Tart, channeling a persona reminiscent of an American high school setting, begins to decimate the foes. As Dia concentrates on her magical incantation, she soon succeeds in demolishing sections of the mansion as well, thereby forging a path to freedom. Just beyond the mansion, at the forest's periphery, Luke, a highly skilled assassin, takes aim with his precision sniper rifle. Witnessing the unfolding devastation, he confirms their suspicions. The mansion's proprietress is indeed the perpetrator behind the village raids, incinerating them and abducting an attractive young woman she called Seizi. He determined that sufficient proof has been gathered and prepares to eliminate the target. Employing his mystical vision, which grants him caliration, he successfully tracks the mansion as Mr. Ashe frantically moves from chamber to chamber, desperately attempting to evade her predetermined destiny. Unaware that her end was already sealed, with a swift motion, Luke pulls the trigger, delivering a precise, scopeless headshot. This event transports him mentally to his former existence as an elite assassin on Earth, operating alongside his apprentice in a scenario where their assignment was to neutralize a group of narcotics traffickers. His precision is unparalleled, as he dispatches the adversaries sequentially, even those attempting to conceal themselves behind vehicles. Having eliminated 6 individuals, he gathers his equipment and prepares to depart. His apprentice proposes to eliminate the remaining syndicate members. But Locke responded, said his directive was limited to 6 targets, thus his mission is complete. The young woman attempts to return, but Locke shortly orders her to be silent. He clarifies that the organization's current objective is merely to replace the upper echelon of the criminal syndicate, and they are strictly forbidden from acting beyond their explicit instructions. The girl falls silent and enters the vehicle. Suddenly, Locke observes an unmanned aerial vehicle hovering overhead, causing his pulse to quicken. He leaps into the car and spins away, instructing the girl to ready her armament. As they are about to be pursued, precisely as he had anticipated, a substantial military convoy in Humvee's Jeeves, opening fire on the escaping vehicle, instantly obliterating it in a very explosion. Unbeknownst to their pursuer, Locke had managed to evade capture. Ruby leaping from the accelerating automobile at the final instant, faking their demise. Locke tends to the girl's wounded leg and advises her to recuperate. As they plan to resume their journey at daybreak, the girl, while attempting to rest, inquires of Locke his initial motivations for becoming an assassin. Locke responded that he was born directly into the organization and meticulously trained by him to become the preeminent assassin globally. Their conversation devolves into an argument, possibly about veganism. Locke then asserts a woman's traditional role by pointing a finger at her head, leaving the girl stunned. She is astonished because, despite her status as a premier assassin, this older man not only managed to aim a weapon at her but also disarmed her of her own pistol before doing so. Locke informed her that will have advised to stone her next bachelors. To make it distinguished from nobility, Jimtran. Locke should have been instructed to eliminate her subsequently to arrest and traces. After thoroughly demonstrating his superior skill, Locke eventually lowers the pistol from her temple and replaces it in her pocket. Before her settles down to rest, the girl remains frozen in disbelief, then retrieves her weapon from its holster and aims it back at him. Locke calmly advises her to simply get some sleep, but the girl genuinely threatens to shoot him. Locke merely resets and reveals that he had already removed all the ammunition from her firearm, once again demonstrating his superior skill. She stands there dumbfounded, now picturing a future convenient making sandwiches. Later that morning, they successfully returned to their secure hideout and contacts the organization, which extends congratulations for his completed final assignment. They extend wishes for a pleasant retirement and instruct him to return to Japan without delay. He produces 2 counterfeit passports and flight tickets, enabling him to board the aircraft without incident. Seated on the aircraft, he contemplates his future endeavors when, abruptly, the plane experiences severe turbulence, and news emerges that it has been commandeered. Locke perceives this as peculiar, so he immediately hurries towards the cockpit, incapacitates the flight attendant, and forces open the door, only to discover both pilots deceased. With the controls rendered inoperable, he understands that the organization is systematically eliminating him to ensure no lingering connections. He accepts his destiny without a smile. He attempts to pilot the aircraft, but the organization, leaving nothing to change, dispatches a fighter jet that obliterates them from the sky. As Locke draws his last breath on Earth, he experiences a profound sense of betrayal in his final moments. Abruptly, he awakens in an unfamiliar dimension, confronted by a formidable white-haired antagonist. The antagonist mocks him for planting his trust in the organization, particularly after he had previously admonished his subordinate about the perils of trusting others. He is perplexed as to why this young woman is toying with him. Upon his inquiry about her wishes, the goddess, who oversees the departed, presents him with a pair of immediate alternatives. His first option is reincarnation on Earth as a new individual, devoid of a past recollection, while the second allows him to be reborn into a fantastical realm, retaining all his previous memory. The second choice comes with a condition. He must undertake a task for her. Having grown weary of Earth and its vegan inhabitants, look up for the fantasy world and then inquires about the specific accident. The deity, with a smile, informs him that his mission is to eliminate the hero destined to be born in that world. A revelation that slightly stuns love. The goddess then resurrects him, offering a cup of cake, and inquires about his motivation for selecting the fantasy world. He begins to explain that during his life on Earth, his existence was dedicated solely to the role of an assassin, where he was instructed to disregard his personal authority and ancient. Concentrating to that. However, in his final moment on the brink of death, he was filled with regret and frustration over not having lived the life he truly desired. He then asks for details about the hero he is assigned to eliminate. Consequently, the goddess instantly transmits all pertinent information about his new realm directly into his mind, granting Luke immediate and comprehensive knowledge of the fantasy world. This world is populated by individuals who exhibit a wide array of magic and physical abilities, powers that would be deemed supernatural on Earth. Amongst them, the hero, in particular, is destined to possess an extraordinarily potent and legendary skill set, which will render him exceptionally challenging to eliminate. However, Locke observes that, for the time being, the hero appears quite admirable and engaged in benevolent actions. He questions her motive for wanting the hero dead, and the goddess responds that the hero's power will progressively escalate until he ultimately confronts the Demon King in a decisive battle, a conflict from which the Demon King will emerge defeated. The hero will then ascend to supreme authority, but within a year or two, this immense power will corrupt him, transforming him into an individual as merciless as the very Demon King have vanquished. This transformation will inevitably lead to the world's destruction, and she tasks him with preventing such an outcome. Locke agrees to undertake the mission, but requests to be endowed with a formidable array of abilities to facilitate his assignment. The goddess consents, bestowing upon him the highest possible human statistics, along with 5 unique special skills, instead of the usual single one. She permits him to select his desired skills, and once he has made his choices, she advises him to exercise caution. She explains that even though he surpasses other humans in this world, who basically possess only one skill, the hero's strength is still considerably greater. Given that the hero commands more than 30 distinct abilities, Locke pledges to be vigilant, and with that, he is transported to a different world, where he is reborn into an aristocratic lineage of esteemed assassins. He is born to a beautiful mother named Ezreal and Alpha Jerkiel, who is a master assassin. Several years elapse, and Locke matures into a highly competent young individual, embarking on hunting expeditions each morning, having mastered the optimal method for taking down game. A precise headshot delivered before the quarry even becomes aware it as being pursued, Kirby ensuring the famous preservation of the Mad Esclavar. He successfully returns with another rabbit, bringing it to the table and meticulously cleaning it. Prior to experimenting with a new culinary approach, his mother expresses her dissatisfaction about not being able to prepare enough meals for him, but he brusquely dismisses her concerns. Asserting that he is able to create a dish that would impress even Gordon Ramsay, he begins to meticulously slice the rabbit into small portions, all the while contemplating the nutritional value. He expects to derive from the man. Much like a dedicated fitness enthusiast, he considers utilizing rabbit meat as his primary protein source due to its low fat content. However, its inherent gaminess makes it less palatable, so to counteract this, he incorporates a variety of herbs and dried mushroom before placing it into a pressure cooker. As the rabbit cooker, he begins preparing the bechamel sauce, a technique he acquired while posing as a contestant on a cooking competition show. in an effort to approach his target, presumably an incompetent, but due to lack of culinary expertise, he then incorporates his creamy sauce into the stew, and presents the dish to his family who all thoroughly enjoy it, and his mother even encourages him to market it to restaurants for profit, a rather mercenary suggestion. Later that evening, Luke's father instructs him to report to the training room for his customary weekly inspection, an order he consistently adheres to. Jan meticulously examines Luke's physical, verifying that his bones, muscles, and joints are developing robustly and correctly. It is revealed that Luke's family also serves as the kingdom's royal physicians, but covertly leverage their medical profession to gain proximity to their assassination targets and eliminate them. His father, a demanding instructor, imparts to him a comprehensive range of both healing and assassination methodologies. Concurrently, he hones his theater, physical prowess, unarmed combat skills, and weapon proficiency. This arrangement proves hugely advantageous for Luke, as it negates the need for him to conceal his training. For his eventual mission to eliminate the hero, one day, following a physical examination, his father instructs Luke to get dressed, commending his excellent recovery, and then informs Luke that he may finally be prepared for a significant surgery. A revelation that greatly excites Luke, as it becomes apparent that his family possesses yet another hidden secret. Luke's father and all his male ancestors previously underwent a unique surgical procedure that transformed their eyes into a potent weapon, granting them the ability to perceive mana post-operation. Additionally, they acquire enhanced low-light vision and the capacity to clearly discern events occurring several hundred meters distant. Luke had been eagerly anticipating this very moment, and promptly consents to the operation. Following the procedure, he is compelled to wear a blindfold for a few days, but upon its eventual removal, he perceives the world with an entirely new clarity. He turns to his father and observes that he can not only see the circulation of mana within his father's body, but also the mana emanating from his own form. His father then informs him that they have at last secured a magic instructor, a pair of nails that genuinely delights Luke. For ever since his arrival in this world, they had harbored a strong desire to master magic. Eventually, the day arrives for him to encounter his magic instructor, and, for reasons unknown, his mother chooses to attire him as a cross-dressing fanboy. Notwithstanding this, he and his family prepare to welcome his new teacher. He had anticipated an elderly male instructor, but, as is typical in anime, he is instead presented with a beautiful, silver-haired young woman named Dia as his tutor. Luke appears unimpressed and questions Dia's competence. Adobe immediately perceives and decides to address by showcasing her abilities. As one of the kingdom's top 5 mages begin generating a massive explosion in the vicinity. The following day, Luke formally introduces himself to Dia, who promptly instructs him to forgo such formalities, explaining that she is merely 3 years his senior. She then presents him with a small crystal orb capable of storing mana and requests that he channel all his available energy into it. Luke completes, beginning to transfer his mana into the crystal orb, and Dia is notably impressed by what appears to be his substantial mana capacity. Nevertheless, her initial impression was formed even before Luke fully revealed his extraordinary capabilities. They have, in fact, amplified his mana capacity a thousandfold through relentless training, and he continues to inundate the small crystal orb with an amount of mana far exceeding its capacity. Dia, observing it begin to crash, panics and urgently instructs him to hurl it as far as possible. Luke instantly hurls the orb into the sky, narrowly saving his family's mansion from destruction by mere seconds. The resulting colossal explosion reverberates through everything. For several miles around, leaving Dia utterly terrified by her student's immense power. At that very moment, his parents rush to the scene, inquiring about the commotion. Dia attempts to shield Luke, suggesting she should have been more cautious. Yet Locke's parents express immense pride in his magical prowess. Xion commends this spell as effective, though he points out its greater utility in combat rather than for an assassin's role. Then asks Daya to instruct Locke in relevant magical techniques. Xion promptly departed after requesting assistance with Locke's magical training. The narrator expresses astonishment at their leniency, recalling how they would have faced severe consequences for even a minor mishap like breaking glassware. Subsequently, Locke questioned if she owns similar crystal orbs, to which she responds negatively, emphasizing their extraordinary worth. She clarifies that these items are not distributed freely. Later that evening, Locke contemplates methods to obtain additional crystal spheres, anticipating their utility in his mission to eliminate the hero. Abruptly, Daya raps on his door, and moments later, they find themselves sharing a bed. Daya then asserts her position as his mentor. She possesses the power to issue an directive, and Locke wishes to comply with her wishes to avert complications. The following day, as they prepare to ascertain Locke's elemental affinities, Daya instructs him to carefully pour a modest quantity of mana into a crystal sphere. She then examines him for fire and water affinities, both of which Locke exhibits, much to Daya's delight. Individuals possessing dual elements are uncommon, yet he requests an assessment for the remaining two. Daya is utterly astonished upon discovering that Locke commands all four fundamental elements. Nevertheless, she is equally pleased to have such a gifted pupil. Subsequently, she instructs him on transforming his mana into specific elements, commencing with the earth attribute. The sequence of events entails a future intimate interaction with Locke, which he discreetly feigns pleasurable. Under her tutelage, he successfully manages to transmute his mana into the earth element. Subsequently, a magical incantation spontaneously manifests in his tauitus. Daya informs Xian that this is the initial spell divinely transmitted to his consciousness following the activation of his magical abilities. Unable to decipher the words that materialize in his mind, Daya provides a practical demonstration, and he manages to replicate her actions with reasonable precision. From his very first attempt, he continues to practice diligently until he fully masters the incantation. Daya expresses genuine joy for him, explaining that increased practice will lead to further spells. Divine intervention will directly implant into his mind. Nevertheless, Locke inquires if she could transcribe the spell she is familiar with, enabling him to attempt their invocation. Daya finds the suggestion fascinating, and upon her writing down the incantation for creating Iron, Locke flawlessly casts it, even without the spell being divinely imparted to him. She is astounded that such a notion had never occurred to her. While Locke speculates that a fundamental mechanism within this world might inhibit individuals from conceiving such ideas, they are capable of this. However, he remains ignorant of the spell language as Manning and can only articulate the words as Taugi Bedaya. A method he finds rather inefficient. Consequently, he requests that she record all the spells she is acquainted with, intending to decipher their underlying linguistic structure. Daya commences transcribing various creation spells. None observes numerical correlations within them. Locke promptly deduces that these figures correspond to physical properties, such as the melting points of metals. He elucidates this concept to Daya. However, her educational background is insufficient to comprehend advanced physics, a sentiment the narrator shares. Regardless, Locke comprehends that he possesses the ability to formulate a spell for gold creation, a spell unknown to Daya. He instructs her to transcribe the relevant values into the magical script, but upon her attempt to cast it, she abruptly wakens and collapses. Locke subsequently attempted to cast the incantation himself, and to his astonishment, he effortlessly produces a gold bridge. He then experiences a sudden realization that his success stems from possessing the brand ability, Spellweaver, which grants him the power to devise novel spells. Nevertheless, After witnessing his single casting of the spell, Daya is also able to replicate his field and both become enthusiastic upon discovering a collaborative method for spell creation. Consequently, Locke and Daya persist in their joint training, fostering a deeper bond between them. Ultimately, Locke devises what could be considered the quintessential American spell, manifesting a pistol capable of firing tungsten projectiles. Daya, too, demonstrates this capability. However, Locke remains dissatisfied with the weapon's destructive capacity, so he escalates his creation, producing a cannon capable of obliterating targets several miles distant. A few nights later, Daya holds Locke tightly. Pasha is scheduled to return to her residence the following day. She expresses a desire to remain with him indefinitely, but acknowledges its impracticality. Instead, Locke presents her with an elegant knife crafted from titanium alloy as a keepsake, and in exchange, Daya bestows upon him one of her scarce crystal orbs. Following this, she secures a pinky promise from him, ensuring he will visit whenever she genuinely desires his presence. The subsequent day, Daya departs for her abode. Once she has departed, Shun determines that Locke has matured sufficiently to delve deeper into their family's affair. He escorts him to a correctional facility housing condemned inmates. He explains Sanchez's individuals serve as practice targets to ensure assassins execute their duties without hesitation. This revelation piques Locke's curiosity, prompting him to question his father. He was instructed to stifle his emotion and transform into an unfailing killing, which would eliminate any reluctance. Shun clarifies that they are human beings, not mere instruments, and they do not simply execute individuals based on orders alone. Instead, they evaluate their target's transgression and can determine that whether their elimination would genuinely serve the kingdom as interest, a judgment that necessitates their inherent humanity. Locke is perplexed, as this philosophy directly opposes the principles he had previously assimilated. During his former existence, after a brief interval, Jian escorts him to a chamber, informing him that the moment has arrived to transition his skill count from 0 to 1. He guides him towards a young woman bound to a chair, enumerating her extensive criminal record, which includes offenses such as theft, robbery, homicide, and arson. Xian instructs him to proceed without hesitation. Despite the girl's place for clemency and her assertion that the events were merely accidental. However, Locke possesses an innate ability to discern deception. Consequently, he severs her wrist with his cane blade, ensuring a comparatively painless damage from exsanguination. At this point, the woman abandons her pretense, erupting into a torrent of expletives. This outburst vexes Locke, prompting him to hurl the knife at her head, thereby ensuring she ceases to assault his auditory senses. Several months afterward, Locke participates in the Harvest Festival alongside his parents. His primary objective, however, is neither to revel in the festivities nor to gain insight into his estate as financial matters. Instead, he seeks an individual possessing mana, whom he can enlist as an aide. For his quest to eliminate the hero, he swiftly locates a mana wielder, but acts as an unappealing elderly man rather than an attractive young woman. Locke promptly dismisses him. Subsequently, he fails to discover any other individuals possessing mana, leading him to resolve to exercise greater patience in his quest. A few days later, with the onset of colder weather, Locke embarks on a hunting expedition for game, to accumulate provisions for the approaching winter. Upon entering the forest, he detects the presence of nearby living beings, and by pressing his ear to the earth, this audacious individual inexplicably ascertains that at out of its in her quarry, this was not to perpend. However, upon arriving at their position, he discovers that the wolves are, in fact, attempting to devour a defenseless girl. Locke prioritizes her rescue. He promptly dispatches the wolf assaulting her, He then executes a dramatic superhero landing directly before her, seemingly to garner admiration, and subsequently instructs her to salvagard his equipment. As he harnesses his abilities against the Wolfies, Locke swiftly eliminates them before addressing the girl. He inquires about her identity and her presence in that location. The girl Shelly informs he that her family lives in extreme poverty and had expelled her from their home to lessen the burden of feeding an additional member. Throughout the winter months, having heard that Locke's family domain was prosperous, she had attempted to traverse the forest to reach it. The girl was then discovered by wolves. Locke, feeling compassion, cooked porridge for her, advising her to suffer it if she desired as a conserving. While she ate it, Locke went to kill and butcher the wolves. Upon his return, he informed the girl that there was the heir of the noble house governing the region. Delighted by this revelation, she exclaimed it must be a divine omen, as she had dreamed the previous night of encountering someone significant. Locke then abruptly invited her to join him, assuring her she would never again face hunger. The girl's joy was evident. However, she inquired if he was truly serious about his proposition. He reaffirmed his desire for her to accompany him, moving the girl to tears as she felt unwanted even by her own parents. Nevertheless, prior to accepting her, Locke explicitly stated he was an assassin destined to take many lives. He explained that if she wished to join him, she would need to assist him in his endeavors. Otherwise, he couldn't bring her. The girl eagerly accepted, as Locke was the first individual in her life who had ever expressed a desire for her presence. As she took his hand, she introduced herself as Tart, and Locke welcomed her, concealing his ulterior motives. It was later revealed that Tart possessed mana, which was the underlying reason Locke had gone to such lengths, displaying his power, providing her sustenance, and even entrusting her with his secrets. All of this was designed to earn her trust, forming a part of his calculated manipulation strategy. He ensured Tart made the decision to accompany him of her own volition, thereby minimizing the risk of future betrayal. 2 years passed, and Tart had evolved into Locke's indispensable assistant, aiding him not only in his professional duties but also in his everyday life. Through Locke's rigorous training, she had developed into a skilled assassin, yet her proficiency was limited to the spear. Locke recognized that a spear was far from the optimal weapon for an assassin, due to its difficulty in concealment. Despite this, he desired Tart to surpass her current abilities. One evening, he discovered her secretly honing her knife skills. Tart immediately apologized for entering the training room without his authorization, explaining her desire to be more valuable to him. However, Locke instructed her to chase. Tart panicked, believing Locke was about to cast her out, much like her own family had. Instead, he conjured a foldable spear using his magic, instructing her to employ it instead. With dignity, Tart effortlessly dismantled the practice dummy, and even Locke was taken aback by her proficiency and concentration. Several weeks later, Locke and Tart visited the local market. There, everyone expressed profound gratitude to Locke. He had been assisting them by recommending innovative fertilizers for their crops and by employing his magic to supply water. During periods of drought, before its spoiler, Tart commended him, remarking that he went above and beyond to assist his subjects. Locke, however, responded that aiding them in their daily lives was simply his obligation as a noble. He explained to her that morally safeguarding them from monsters and bandits was insufficient to truly earn their loyalty, hence his additional efforts. Tart was deeply impressed by his philosophy, especially since the noble from her own homeland was a notoriously avaricious and indifferent ruler who cared nothing for his population. Later that evening, Locke added several magical crystal orbs to his hidden collection. He had previously analyzed the crystal ball they had bequeathed to him and successfully reverse engineered a method to manufacture them himself. Consequently, he now possessed thousands of these crystal spheres, each brimming with magical energy, prepared for use as weaponry should the need arise. At that moment, Tart entered his chambers, informing him that his father had summoned him to the training room. Upon Locke's arrival, Tian was did not tema and immediately questioned him about Tart. Locke responded that she had developed sufficient skill to undertake minor assignments independently, but this was the Tian's primary concern. Locke quickly grasped the true nature of his father's inquiry, and assured him that she was not as pay dispatched by a rival noble house to pilfer their technique west. She guaranteed his father that he had been observing her meticulously, and her body language betrayed no sense of dishonesty. Tian expressed relief upon hearing this, as had Tart indeed been an infiltrator. They would have been compelled to eliminate her. This would have been regrettable, given the extreme rarity of commoners possessing mana. They still harbored the thought that numerous coincidences marked Locke and Tart's initial encounter, but he now found himself able to believe it was a miraculous twist of fate that united them. Following this, Tian informed Locke that they had summoned him for his next training exercise, which also served as a unique assessment. He explained that if Locke successfully completed this test, and then on subsequent triang, he would graduate from his tutelage and be recognized as a fully qualified associate, prepared to undertake missions. Locke readily accepted the assignment, which, as it transparent, was a unique form of Ferguson bonding involving a physical confrontation. They ventured into the forest to engage in an assassin's duel. Locke quickly understood that the one who located the other first would gain a significant advantage, a realization that led to his immediate defeat against his father in that regard. Because Tian detected him and launched arrows before Locke even became aware of his presence, Locke began to flee, simultaneously analyzing the direction from which the projectiles originated. He swiftly located his father and hurled his knife, but Tian effortlessly parried it. Locke then dropped to the ground to initiate an attack, narrowly evading his father's initial blow. However, as he attempted to strike, Tian managed to injure his knee. Locke, against the odds, delivered a kick and treated distance, and thanks to his healing magic, he was able to restore his leg to fighting condition rapidly. He remained consoled, contemplating that he was both stronger and swifter than his father, and also possessed invaluable experience from his previous existence. Nevertheless, they continued to be outmaneuvered because Tian called employees magical eyes to anticipate Locke's actions. These weren't akin to a Sharingan, but they allowed him to discriminate physiological shifts in Locke's body, thereby predicting his next maneuver. Just then, he sensed Tian drawing near, prompting him to attempt an escape, which inadvertently triggered a trap. Locke successfully evaded the snare, but this proved to be a diversion. The genuine assault originated from Tian, who once again kept him constantly on guard. This time, Locke managed to connect with Akechi, and Tian disappeared into the dense forest. Locke then resolved to concentrate more on anticipating his father's movement rather than his own evasive actions. He positioned himself near a tree, sensing two distinct surges of Brutus. At that precise moment, a knife came hurtling towards him from the right. Locke narrowly avoided it, only to discover another knife approaching him from the left as well. Ordinarily, he would have assumed that the assassin, his father, was aiming for his weaker side. However, this time he understood that this was also a feint, because a true assassin must stay Brutus when delivering a fatal blow. Locke deflected the knife just in the neck of Tim as his father lunged at him from behind. Tian succeeded in stabbing his shoulder, but since Locke had already positioned a blade at his father's throat, he considered defeat in the skirmish. Later, Tian bandaged Locke's injury, subtly annoyed that he had been bested by his son, who had not yet even reached puberty. Himself had this boded well for their family as future, particularly because Locke had deliberately restrained himself during the fight, refraining from using magic. Locke explained that if he had employed magic, the confrontation would have been rendered meaningless, as it would have served as a true assessment of his abilities as an assassin. Qian then realized that his son had matured significantly and declared that he had no further lessons left to impart. Informed Locke that he was now prepared to undertake genuine assignments, and that the sole remaining requirement for him to grow stronger was practical experience. From that day forward, Qian began including Locke on his field mission, where he would eliminate corrupt and avaricious nobles for their egregious offenses, their clandestine profession being the termination of levies. Qia, a renowned physician, was a primary work involved saving levies, frequently receives invitations to noble residency, and he brings Locke along. This allows Locke to observe the extensive security measures implemented by the aristocracy. One day, while returning from Apatin as home, Qian informs Locke about his ultimate training exercise. This also serves as his final assessment before he can undertake independent assignment. She explained that assassins do not always gain entry through back doors. Instead, they sometimes adopt this guise to pass through the main gate and eliminate their target by cultivating truth. Locke is quite familiar with this particular method. He then asks his father if he desires him to become a chef, given his proficiency in the culinary arts. However, Qian wishes for him to assume the role of a merchant, as nobles tend to be less vigilant around traders. Merchants are skilled at acquiring desired goods. Qian has already meticulously fabricated an impeccable false identity for Locke Neligala, the son of a prominent merchant family, was patriarch of Qian Aden. Consequently, they have consented to his terms and are prepared to instruct Locke in merchant practices for the next 2 years. Shortly thereafter, Qian hosts a celebratory gathering for Locke. This is the cause Locke is about to embark on his culminating test. All the subsidiary families involved in the assassination trade are present for this occasion. While everyone expresses admiration for Locke as genius, an inebriated youth named Rana is visibly incensed, hurling his impious gas at Locke. Locke effortlessly catches it. Rana as father attempts to intervene, but Rana vehemently declares his refusal to accept Locke as the family's successor, stating that after the death of Qian's first son, he was meant to inherit the position, and it is unjust for someone he perceives as weaker to claim it in. Qian proposes that their relative strength be determined through combat. He immediately issues the command to commence fighting. Rana was completely unprepared when he realized Locke was already positioned behind him. With his blade pressed against Rana's throat, Locke inflicts a minor cut as a warning. However, as Qian declares the fight concluded, he releases Rana. This intoxicated individual, nonetheless, has not yet learned his lesson and charges at Locke, who promptly pins him to the ground and fractures his arm. Qian seizes this moment to enhance his son's reputation, proclaiming that this is the proper way for assassins to fight. He adds that no one present can defeat Locke in a confrontation. However, Locke harbors different intentions, and later that night, he invites Rana to meet him in the garden. No sober, Rana acknowledges his earlier boorish behavior. He admits his continued frustration at being bashed by someone 4 years his junior, despite being considered the strongest among the branch families. Locke then informs him that he should consider himself fortunate, as his own father, the family's most formidable assassin to date, was defeated by someone 30 years younger than himself. Rana is astonished to learn the veracity of the rumors regarding Locke's victory over Qian. Subsequently, Locke extends an offer, asking him to become his subordinate. This would be not as an assassin, but as a knight. Given that Rana's swordsmanship surpasses his stealth abilities, Rana, while perhaps arrogant, is not foolish. He therefore accepts the proposal to serve as the principal aide to the family as prospective leader. The following day, Luke commences his journey. He is to train with the Baller family, and Dia accompanies him. They soon arrive at Melchior, a bustling merchant town, where Luke alters his hair color. He thereby fully adopts his new persona as Atreides. Concurrently, within the same town, a blue-haired girl named Maha operates a modest yet lucrative enterprise. Her deceased father was a merchant. She acquired fundamental business knowledge from him, and now she leads a small group of orphans who oversee the tourist to visit her. So grand, it is honorable labor. Under Maha's guidance, her companions are experiencing a significantly improved quality of life compared to what they might otherwise have endured. Maha harbors aspirations of accumulating wealth, sufficient to secure a home for all of them. Everyone is content, but at that precise moment, a group of ruffians materializes before their dwelling. These imbeciles brazenly declare their intention to abduct them. Maha confronts them using her magical abilities, instructing her friends to flee. She also attempts to escape. However, the ruffians apprehend her along with two of her companions. They are promptly transported to an orphanage situated outside the tower. Managed by a repulsive individual named Thorin. He informs them that they will henceforth be integrated into his orphanage. The boy accompanying Maha retorts angrily, stating that they have no need of his assistance, as they were managing perfectly well independently. Thorin strikes him, asserting that anyone who defies him or attempts to flee will face retribution. Maha and the others are then confined to a room. Their remaining friends are already gathered there. They ponder the motive behind their addiction and placement in an orphanage, but Oniguro observes that the local Lord Swift operates a charitable organization that finances orphanages, which is why Thorin updated him to illicitly gain funds. At that moment, one of the ruffians tosses a sack of vegetables into the room, informing them it constitutes their sustenance for the entire week. While the others despair, Maha instructs them to begin preparing a meal. As they settle down to consume their meal, the children reflect that they had always desired shelter, but not under such circumstances, and they express apprehension about their impending fate. All these events transpired several years prior, then now everyone has matured somewhat. They are employed as domestic staff within the orphanage. Furthermore, they are compelled to sell garments for sale in the marketplace. Those who fail to meet performance expectations are subjected to beatings by the ruffian. Thorin instructs the late Duke to exercise restraint, as he requires them to be in pristine condition for his subsequent venture, which entails trafficking them to depraved individuals. Gradually, each of Maha's companions endures the most horrific experiences of their existence, and one is so profoundly traumatized that she disfigures her face with acid, hoping to render herself undesirable for purchase. Several years subsequent, Maha inadvertently overhears Thorin discussing with his subordinates how she has now attained an age suitable for acquiring her own clientele. She becomes distraught upon recalling the fates of all her friends and rushes to the barrier with the intention of disfiguring her own face. However, at that precise moment, Luke materializes behind her, uttering some awkward remarks about not marring her countenance with tear. Shortly thereafter, all the girls are arranged in a lane before him. Thorin presents him as the heir of the Baller Trading Company, who is prepared to select one girl as his assistant, who persuades through everyone present, save for the girl who had disfigured her face. However, Luke's interest is solely in Maha. He requests her to serve as his assistant, and Maha demurs, believing it to be unjust to her companion. Nevertheless, Luke finalizes an agreement with Thorin, who informs him that the girl requires time to prepare, suggesting her return in 3 days to collect her. Maha is seized with panic upon comprehending that the villain intends to sell her to the private individual and then sold her personally. Yet she does not voice her concerns in his presence. Luke agrees to the conditions, but cautions Thorin that, having acquired Maha, she is now considered a member of his household. Later that evening, Maha is ready for her initial clean. Inside the chariot, Thorin begins to behave inappropriately with her, remarking that had the young man arrived a month later, he could have extracted greater profit from her. Maha Estelle is turned to Locke, and her fervent desire to remain on the field before joining him unexpectedly triggers the awakening of her magical abilities. She shoves Thorin, extricating herself from the conveyance. She flees into the woods, but the head of the ruffian overtakes her. As he, too, possesses the ability to wield mana. Maha implores him to release her, but he forcibly holds her, suggesting that perhaps she should enjoy her fears on this occasion. Abruptly, Luke appears, flinging the assailant aside and instructing Maha that he requires her immediate presence. Thorin also rushes onto the scene, informing Luke that he is unable to take the girl today. However, when Luke asserted that he could not jeopardize his family, Thorin instructed his subordinate to attack him. The henchman charged at Luke, who effortlessly incapacitated him with shattering his arm. Thorin then assaulted Luke himself, only to be subdued with equal haste. Instead of ending his life, Luke opted to hand him over to the legal authorities. Meanwhile, Taran at Nima visited the field as residents, accompanied by Glendower Wolford as the gentleman. By the following morning, Thorin and his entire syndicate were apprehended. Consequently, the young women were able to resume their lives without constraint. Luke even hailed the scarred girl as fast as a favor to Mama, who had to depart from her companions to join her destined partner. A few days later, Luke performed a surgical procedure on the legitimate son of the Beller household. Strictly enjoining him to secrecy, the family as patriarch expressed profound gratitude towards Luke. He inquired how he might settle his obligation, emphasizing that Rachel merchants never accept anything without compensation. Luke simply requested permission for his family to reside there as a contingency refuge. This arrangement would serve as a safeguard should his clandestine activities lead to significant complications. Jemer Beller, delegated, then Rachel finalizing the adoption documents for Maha into their family as well. A fortnight later, Beller presented Luke with the blueprints of a commercial establishment they possess, elaborating that their initial attempt to establish it as a liquor outlet proved disastrous, and they now intend to transform it into a different retail venture. Beller then requested Luke to oversee its operation. Due to his confidence in Luke's capability and integrity, Luke readily accepted the assignment, subsequently informing Tart and Maha of his intention to also utilize this establishment for his assassination-related endeavor to achieve this. He must offer products appealing to the nobility, thus concluding that marketing premium cosmetics and confections to allure noble women would be the optimal strategy for both generating income and acquiring intelligence. He promptly discusses this concept with Rudolph, the red-nosed reindeer, and Rudolph as Swift, who harbors intense animosity towards Luke, convinced that he is her husband as illegitimate offspring. When Luke presents his proposal for a cosmetic enterprise, they inform him that the market is oversaturated and brand reputation outweighs product efficacy. Luke acknowledges this yet. He asserts his intention to launch an entirely novel product. He initiates a conversation with his adoptive stepmother, explaining how makeup removal strips the skin of its natural oils and moisture, causing long-term damage. She conjures, whereupon Luke unveils what he claims is the world's inaugural moisturizer bottle. He explains its capacity to mitigate the harm inflicted by cosmetic items. Intrigued, the woman applies the moisturizer to her skin, instantly perceiving a change. Peeling off her mask to reveal an aged and lined countenance, She told Bilok that had such a moisturizer existed earlier, her complexion would be significantly improved. The woman assents. And Evan Baller samples itu subsequently suggests his stepmother apply makeup atop the moisturizer, emphasizing its skin protective qualities. Even as she adorns herself, the elderly woman is so profoundly impressed by the moisturizer that she is prepared to embrace look as her own child. Her husband then instructs her to disseminate samples among her acquaintances, thereby cultivating a ready consumer base by the time the product officially launches. He then inquires about Locke's weekly production capacity, to which Locke responds with a limit of 200 bottles, cautioning against immediate hearing of staff for this purpose, as it poses a risk of proprietary information being divulged to rivals. Instead, he advocates for a gradual escalation of manufacturing output. Baller grasps the rationale and urges him to commence work, but Locke explains his necessity to journey to the family of Whalers, non-assassins, as a crucial ingredient for the moisturizer exclusively thrives in that region. They resolve to establish the production facility there. Through safeguard their proprietary methods, Baller grants his approval, and Locke, accompanied by Taran, returns home after a considerable period. 1 month subsequent to this, Locke's cosmetic boutique has become a sensation in the marketplace, managed by Mah and her companions from the orphanage. Locke's renown has spread throughout the kingdom, affording him effortless entry into aristocratic residences. Should he choose to undertake an assassination, Tart is certainly impressed by this, yet she is even more moved by his benevolence in employing Maha as friends at the establishment. Locke asserted his decision was purely a business calculation, but Tart dismisses this, believing him to be a soft-hearted individual feigning a thug exterior. Locke inquires about the factory as security, and Tart reports that spies have attempted infiltration and employee bribery, though without success thus far. Locke anticipates that their desperate rivals will soon resort to more drastic measures. That very evening, he detects an individual nearing his chamber. He deduces this PS's intention to abduct him and extract the moisturizer as formula. Providentially, Tart and Maha are vigilant and succeed in apprehending the intruder. Before Locke needs to intervene, they subsequently interrogate the spy under duress, but they experience without divulging any information, a fact that does not unduly concern Locke. He resolves to take his customary monthly day out to visit Dio. Both Tart and Maha experience loneliness in his absence, prompting them to indulge in a delectable meal. As they await his return, concurrently, Locke shows to Diaz Abode, bearing chocolate cookies, where she informs him of her recent magical creations. Since his previous visit, on this occasion, she has devised an anti-gravity enchantment, much to Locke's astonishment, as he had anticipated making such a discovery himself. Regarded, they enjoy their tea party and practice various incantations. As dusk descends, Locke returns to his estate with the passage of time. Locke dispatches Tart to various but rigorous and astonishingly coworkers at the Centurion Exultima Lucius Apparatus, similar merchandise. During this period, he has frequented numerous social gatherings, forging alliances with aristocrats, so that will facilitate his future assignments. 2 years have now elapsed since his integration into the Baller family, and the moment for his homecoming has arrived. Locke resolves to leave Maha in the city, entrusting her with the management of his cosmetic establishment. She expresses confidence in her ability to competently manage and even expand the store. She informs Locke of her intention to establish branches in other urban centers and reveals her chosen inaugural location. Locke is taken aback by the chosen seat, having previously delved into Maha's history and discovered it was once a retail outlet operated by her father's enterprise. However, following her father's betrayal by his second-in-command and subsequent murder for financial gain, Maha perceived a thrill to her own life and escaped to this city. Locke now comprehends That Maha intends to reclaim her paternal campaign, with this store serving as her initial stride towards that objective. He grants her full autonomy, expressing his trust in her judgment. Her status, his indifference to personal matters influencing her professional duties, provided she delivers satisfactory outcomes. Maha is pleased with this assurance. At that moment, her friends enter the room to present Locke with a parting gift, expressing their gratitude for rescuing them from their circumstances and offering them an opportunity for a respectable existence. Locke receives their present, assuring them he will always remember them. Subsequently, he refers to his customary appearance and prepares for his journey home. He enters smile with the oversight of both the commercial enterprise and the intelligence network he established there. She pledges diligent effort, then requests Locke to visit her periodically. As her work felt quite isolated in his absence, Locke vows to visit her between assignments. With that, he departs in a carriage, observing Park as somber demeanor. Attributable to her already missing Maha, abruptly, Locke detects Mana in the vicinity and instantly commands the driver to halt the carriage. He discovers a pack of Lupin creatures. The group finds themselves surrounded, and takes Locke as permission to display her combat prowess. As soon as he grants in, she draws her spear, which was secured to her leg. She proceeds to eliminate the wolves one by one, also utilizing various magical abilities. Locke is thoroughly impressed by her performance, yet he simultaneously realizes that, with monsters now encroaching upon human settlement, the time for a hero's emergency is drawing near. Soon after, he returned to his family's ancestral lands. He decides to first visit the local farming community. Everyone greets him with enthusiasm, offering him fresh produce as a token of their continued affection. Despite his 2-year absence, following this, Locke hits home, where his somewhat eccentric model immediately begins to sniff him, having missed him immensely. Once she has finished, Locke wishes to see his father, who is occupied in his study. Sion expresses genuine admiration for Locke's significant development over these 2 years. He mentions that he has unlocked to learn mercantile skills from Bale, but never imagined they would become a globally renowned businessman in such a short span of 2 years. Khan informs Locke that he dispatched him to the Baller family not solely to establish a secondary identity Usefun for his assassination duties, but for another purpose as well. Unaware of this additional reason, Locke's father explains that he wished for him to discover an alternative way of life. Beyond that of an assassin, Locke is visibly shocked by this reflection, prompting Khan to clarify that Locke possesses the inherent talent to become an exceptional merchant. He suggests that Locke could lead a far more fulfilling existence through commerce than through taking levies. Khan claims he is too old for anything other than assassination. But Locke is still young, and has not yet taken a life during his assassination mission. For this reason, Khan desires him to carefully consider his future path. And, if he wishes to avoid a life of bloodshed, Locke is resistant to this ideal. Having dedicated everything to becoming a superior assassin, Khan tells him that while their profession is vital, that for safeguarding their nation, the country itself holds no true regard for them. He warns that if their secrets were to be exposed, even accidentally, the king would instantly disown him and turn against them. This is precisely why he created a secondary identity for Locke as a contingency plan, allowing him to withdraw before fully committing. Khan leaves the ultimate decision to Locke, who then proudly declares his intention to continue as an assassin. Khan asks him for his reasoning, and Locke explains that he has encountered many cherished individuals in his brief life, whose happiness he wishes to protect, both along with the well-being of other innocent citizens. Therefore, he will eliminate those who threaten to destabilize their kingdom, even if he is abandoned for doing so. He states that he will confront challenges as the heresy, and if he cannot be an assassin, he will permanently consider becoming a merchant. Khan is impressed by his resolve, and then Luke reveals an additional motive. He desires to be a noble assassin, not a merchant. He confesses his love for Day, and his aspiration to marry her someday. A golfer, which he requires a noble title, Khan initially laughs at this, but ultimately supports his son as courage. With that, he hands Luke his very first genuine mission. The task is to eliminate a nobleman who trades military intelligence for narcotics. Luke vows to execute the mission flawlessly. However, before he takes the noble as slave, Luke decides to verify if the target truly merits assassination. He dispatches an encrypted message to Mao, instructing her to gather information about him and to arrange his infiltration of the mansion. Given the absence of wireless communication in this world, he must rely on carrier pigeons to deliver his message. He resolves to rest until a response is retrieved. In the interim, Kesri begins to bother him about finding a wife, eager to share her grandchildren soon. She has compiled a list of potential brides from aristocratic families, but Luke rejects every single one. Thus, he has no interest in arranged marriages. He avoids discussing this matter with his mother, delegating the task to Tark, who asserts that Luke is too youthful for matrimony. And procreation never tells. When Isri suggests that Tark herself could become the mother of his children, Tark stance instantly changes. She then declares that perhaps the timing is indeed opportune. However, Luke quickly rebuffs both his mother and Tark, instructing them to cease bothering him with such trivialities. Later that evening, he alters his appearance, reassuming his merchant persona to gain entry into the nobleman's residence. Tark questions whether he ought to await Maha's intelligence report, but Luke informs her that they should personally observe what is openly apparent, while Maha uncovers the concealed realities. The following morning, they arrive at a neighboring city, where they encounter numerous wounded soldiers. Luke the Duchess thinks their injuries are likely a consequence of the nobleman's betrayal of military secrets. Just then, a young woman approaches, offering to sell them jam and provides a complimentary sample jar. Luke and Tark instantly grow wary of her. As Luke samples the jam, he confirms the presence of narcotics within it. He then informs the girl that she still has an opportunity to choose her activities. He then shatters her entire basket. The girl becomes distressed, attempting to salvage the jam, just as a group of ruffians appear, intent on confronting Luke. Luke and Tark swiftly incapacitate them, but recognize them as mere low-ranking dealers. He understands that vanquishing more individuals like them will not resolve the underlying issue. He then directs his focus to the distraught girl, who was desperate for the drugs who supply her addicted mother. Luke resolves to visit her mother, who is struggling with addiction. The mother has become deranged due to her dependency, and she assaults her daughter when they need the jam. Luke restrains her, employing his mana to render her unconscious and modify her brain as chemical composition, thoroughly eliminating her physical craving for the substance. Though the woman could still harbor a psychological reliance, Luke and Tark return home that evening, discovering a delivery of cosmetic goods, dispatched by Mara, accompanied by a messenger. She has uncovered that the nobleman is, in fact, the mastermind behind this illicit operation. Yet he asserts that the cartel operates extensively within his territory, explaining the prevalence of narcotics. He has corrupted higher-ranking nobles to ensure his impunity, which prevents the king from actively prosecuting him. This information solidifies Luke's decision to accept the assignment and eliminate the despicable individual responsible for the suffering of innocent people. The following morning, he sets off for the nobleman's estate. Once again in his merchant disguise, Maha accompanies him. Having felt excessively solitary in his absence, she clings to him throughout the journey, openly declaring her desire for him to share his DNA with him. Luke pays her no mind, much like one might disregard terms and conditions, before accepting them. They soon arrive at the city where the nobleman resides, a place that appears remarkably affluent. Especially considering its primary industry is agriculture, the nobleman's mansion prominently displays his immense riches. They are greeted by the nobleman espouse, who expresses enthusiasm at meeting the founder of the globally renowned moisturizer enterprise. Locke extends his greetings and presents her with his companion's newest offering. The woman inquires why he is showcasing the product to her prior to its market release. Locke responds by stating that it is widely known how her husband has been swiftly advancing his domain, positioning him as a central figure within noble circles. They desire her endorsement of their new products to capture the attention of all aristocratic women. The woman is clearly pleased with this compliment. She begins to recount how, only a few years prior, they were quite impoverished, but are now exceedingly wealthy at that moment. Her husband appears and introduces himself to Locke. He expresses gratitude that Locke selected his wife to test their new product. Locke observes that his target genuinely cherishes his spouse. That evening, the nobleman hosts a celebration where both Locke and the novel moisturizer bottle receive considerable notice. The nobleman repeatedly extols his affection for his wife, and witnessing the noblest public display of affection, Locke feels a subtle jealous. After several days of observation, he identifies the perfect opportunity to act. He discovers the noble's habit of gazing at the moon before bathing and plans to eliminate him with a sniper shot from a distance during this private ritual. Locke takes careful aim while Tart stands guard behind him. Once his target is locked, he fires a bullet that instantly penetrates the noble's head, ending his life. Locke feels a sense of accomplishment that the task is complete, but then the noble's wife appears on the balcony, utterly devastated by the sight of her deceased husband. This scene stirs a flicker of emotion within Locke. He contrasts this emotional response with his past life, where he felt nothing even after taking countless lives, acknowledging that he has undergone a significant change in his new existence. Despite his profession as an assassin, he is no longer a cold, unfeeling instrument. A few days later, Locke and his companions embark on a vacation to a secluded island. Upon their return home, Maha provides him with the information he requested her to research, revealing she has located the divine treasure has ordered a formidable spear. Tart asks Locke to explain what a divine treasure is, and he tells her they are indestructible and incredibly potent artifacts that have existed since ancient times. Maha then informs them that she is attempting to negotiate the purchase of the spear from its current possessor, Setanta, whom she believes is a prime candidate to become a hero. She admits to facing some challenges in the negotiations but asks Locke to trust her, assuring him that as a merchant, she will successfully complete this acquisition. Following this, some troubling news emerges. Maha tells Locke that a civil war has erupted in the neighboring kingdom, and Daya's family has sided with the royal faction. Locke as the manner becomes noticeably tense upon hearing this. However, Maha then reveals the most alarming detail. A particular soldier within the rebel force has been causing significant problems, and this individual is none other than Setanta. Setanta, who owns the divine spear, Locke immediately flees to Daya's residency to discuss the matter, where she greets him with her usual cheerfulness. When Locke brings up the subject of the war, she casually dismisses it, stating that it is far from her home and not as serious as it appears. Too, she believes they will be safe. Locke, however, warns her that he might be confronting the hero who is aligned with the rebels and shows that Badruches, ordinary humans would be incapable of defeating him. He then reveals his secret identity. A merchant to Daya, offering to use his influence to evacuate her and her entire family from the country before they face a indictment. However, Daya becomes indignant at this suggestion, asserting her pride as a noble of this kingdom. and her obligation to protect it. She then quickly reverts to her normal self, asking like how he colored his hair. He attempts to explain that it is not the appropriate time for such a conversation. But Daya completely ignores him. She suggestively go on that since her father is not currently home, and ultimately, Locke is compelled to agree to her wishes. They head to the market after Daya dyes her hair too much here. She begins to ponder where they should eat as Locke starts to list the best restaurants in her city. He suddenly notices a passing merchant and remarks that the man must be a former soldier, claiming he possesses an intuitive ability for identifying other military personnel. Nothing told the city appears to have money. Daya explained had her family invited retired soldiers to establish businesses here, as they could assist with evacuation should the conflict reach the city. Following this, Daya spots a new shop and eagerly rushes inside. Inside, she discovers an archery game and excitedly requests Luke to win at a debut for Harry. He agrees, taking careful aim and utilizing mana to precisely target the bullseye. Daya, however, declares this to be unfair. Unable to simply suppress his innate ability to win the prize, Locke opts to instruct Daya in archery instead. And remarkably, he successfully coaches her to strike the teddy bear target in only 3 tries. Afterward, they continue their date, enjoying it as an ordinary couple as it becomes time for Luke to depart. Daya informs he that she will be occupied and unable to meet him regularly. Luke acknowledges this and takes his leave, promising to arrange another meeting whenever her schedule permits. However, the moment he is gone, Daya commands everyone to chase their charity, and they shed their disguises. This reveals them out to be soldiers prepared for battle. Daya intends to let her troops into conflict shortly, and she weeps as she says goodbye to Locke, questioning if they will ever cross paths again. Several days later, as Locke relaxes at his estate, Tart urgently approaches him with news of accretion. He accompanies her back to her residence, where he discovers his father attending to a gravely wounded man. Locke inquires about the individual's identity, and can reveal he is their nose clan, seeking Daya's assassination. The clan specifically requests Locke to undertake this assignment. Locke is distraught by the revelation, but Tian assures him he is free to decline if he wishes. Locke chooses to first ascertain the full details before reaching a conclusion. His father explained that Daya's family had supported the king during their nation's civil war but ultimately suffered defeat. As the vanquished party, Daya's father was compelled to pay war reparation, liquidating the majority of his assets to settle his obligations. However, the victorious faction remains unsatisfied, and they have demanded that he surrender Daya to them, citing her beauty and mana abilities, which would allow her to their powerful, magic-wielding offspring. Daya's father consented to this, and furthermore, to prevent further bloodshed, she also agreed to a marriage with an unsavory noble. Locke becomes furious with himself for failing to purchase this during their recent outing. There, however, continues the narrative, explaining that the populace of Daya's domain profit more loyal than her own king, forming a volunteer militia to safeguard her. This development has ignited yet another civil conflict, and an army has been deployed to subdue the volunteers and apprehend Daya. Locke then comprehends that the clan's true intention is for him to eliminate Daya, thereby removing the casus belli for the ongoing conflict. He is stunned to discover that their clan is, in fact, Daya's own father Gian. Informs him that the assassination will be staged, and he will secretly extract Daya while publicly declaring her demise. Locke now grasps the true nature of the mission. However, he questions why his father would undertake an assignment that does not directly serve their kingdom as interested. Kian states that he accepted the mission because Daya's father is a personal friend, and he wishes to assist him. He informs Locke that should he decline this task, he will go himself. but it will be too late. As he lacks sufficient mana to arrive swiftly. Chen gestures towards the injured messenger, who departed Daya as Legia 3 days prior. And we know, the conflict there must have already commenced. His status, Cat only Locke possesses the capability to reach the location and time to save Daya, but they well comprehend if Locke chooses not to accept the assignment. Locke is our third. As an assassin, he ought to decline this particular task. However, given that it involves the woman he cares for, he is prepared to jeopardize everything. He informs his father that he will rescue Daya, and his father expresses his satisfaction, revealing that he too owns transgressed their family as code for Asrian. Who, coincidentally, hails from the same lineage as Daya. Locke is astonished by this revelation, and can clarify that Daya is, in fact, his distant cousin. This explains their similar hair color. However, given their noble status, such familial connections are not uncommon. Locke immediately prepares to depart for his mission, and Tart declares her intention to assist him. He points out that she wouldn't be able to match his speed over a distance of 300 kilometers, but Tart is already aware of this. Instead, she proposes to carry Locke for a portion of the journey, allowing him to conserve his energy for when it is most needed. Locke accepts her assistance, and Tart conjures a wind-based shield ahead of them, which not only eliminates air resistance but also propels Locke forward through a vacuum effect. While this enables Locke to traverse significant distances effortlessly, Tart is rapidly depleting her substantial reserves of stamina and magical energy. Recalling Locke as rescued, motivated by his need for her mana, she perceives this as an ideal opportunity to assist him, consequently exceeding her physical boundaries. She propels Locke much further than he anticipated, yet ultimately, her enchantment collapses, and the force of the wind hurls her backward. Locke intercepts her, questioning her destiny. Tart feels dejected, believing she can no longer aid him, but he reassures her that her efforts in bringing him this far were more than sufficient. Tart requests a promise from him that he will come back with Daya. Locke vows that both of them will return safely before he sprints onward, arriving at Daya's residence under the cover of night. Upon arrival, he observes a mere 200 of your family as troop, engaging 15 adversaries, a significant number of whom are magic practitioners, which Locke considers peculiar. However, Gaston comprehends that Daya is proficient with firearms, and has likely been assisting the soldiers in fending off the attacker, sparking an idea for his subsequent action. He promptly retrieves his sniper rifle, targeting the enemy army as most formidable magic wielder. The opposing soldiers descend into disarray as their spellcasters are struck down without warning. Despite their familiarity with gunshot, they attempt to assault Locke with crossbows. He effortlessly evades their projectiles, then employs wind magic to discern the soldiers' conversation. He listens and discovers their panic stems from the unexpected arrival of an additional marksman in the conflict. Locke resolves to amplify the pandemonium by deploying crystal orbs charged with magic, meticulously proportioning fire, wind, and chaos mana within each sphere to generate potent, shrapnel-dispersing detonations. He silently launches these orbs at the adversaries using a bow. Upon impact, the crystal spheres erupt in colossal explosions. The moment they strike the ground, the soldiers begin to disperse. Locke's attention is then drawn to Daya, who is vigilantly positioned by her window. At that precise moment, her troops enter the fray. Observing the enemy as disarray, Locke allows them to divert all focus, enabling him to covertly advance towards the estate. Discovering the corpse of a female combatant, he resolves to utilize it as a diversion. Prior to that, however, he employs his magic to locate an entry point into the manor. The estate is entirely abandoned. He quickly uncovers an unguarded route, which he uses to access Daya's chamber, where she awaits with her father. The instant Daya spots him, She rushes into his embrace, declaring her unwavering certainty that he would come to her rescue. Subsequently, Daya's father arrives to welcome Locke. He expresses gratitude for Locke's act of safeguarding his daughter, yet also playfully comments that he would have preferred to encounter her sweeter earlier, causing Daya to blush. However, her father, recognizing the urgency of the situation, informs Locke that he had intended to capitulate, but his loyal soldiers, realizing his plan, convinced him her to ensure Daya's safety. To be protecting Daya, Locke inquires about his current intentions, and the man reveals his plan to unleash a curious assault. By drawing the enemy's focus, he intends to create an opening for his comrades to flee. However, he has no intention of perishing. Instead, he plans to disappear from the combat zone. Once his troops have safely retreated, he will consolidate his forces to mount a retaliatory strike against the insurgency and reclaim the monarchy from their grasp. Locke approves of the strategy, proposing they ignite the road and spread the story that Daya immolated herself, unable to bear further carnage. He positions the deceased soldier as body as a diversion, then instructs Daya to carry out from the window that she cannot endure living after such extensive loss of life. On her account, Daya consents and opens the casement, but just as she prepares to utter her faked suicide declaration, Locke perceives an anomaly, recognizing the familiar sensation he encountered in his former existence just prior to a fighter jet assault, deducing their imminent peril. He surveys the surroundings using his enchanted vision. He quickly pinpoints the train, situated a mile distant. The adversary hurls an enormous spear towards him, which then discharges smaller projectiles. The spear eliminates all soldiers in its trajectory. Locke instantly forces Daya to the ground while deploying a miniature nuclear device to intercept the assault. Nevertheless, even with the potent explosive he launched, the spear retains its velocity, utterly demolishing the row before halting in mid-flight. Both Locke and Daya are astonished by the sight of the spear. The weapon then abruptly begins to radiate with mana, subsequently rocketing back to its wielder at hand. Locke now has an opportunity to properly observe the view, identifying a self-assured target, possessing an immense quantity of mana. The adversary also spots him, prompting Locke to instantly draw his cannon for an offensive. He instructs Daya and her father to shield their ears. He discharges an explosive projectile that strikes the enemy squarely. Daya believes such a potent blast is unsurvivable, but their opponent is far from an ordinary combatant. Locke observes that the explosion merely stripped the enemy of his armor, leaving him otherwise unharmed. He appears invigorated after enduring the impact. Experiencing pain for the very first time, he exclaims with delight that it was magnificent, and his musculature begins to hypertrophy as if he can be weeks of training in asylum. Locke comprehends that this is the S-rank ability known as Berserk, which amplifies offensive and defensive capabilities proportionate to inflicted damage. He understands that the adversary is currently overwhelmingly powerful. Even if he were to fire his cannon at him again, it would prove ineffective. Daya's father promptly instructs Locke to seize the gear and escape. They no longer have the luxury of faking her demise, as they confront the warrior, who unilaterally controlled the civil war, compelling even the royal family to capitulate, recognizing their inability to overcome him. Concurrently, the soldier begins to shoot at Locke, expressing genuine admiration for his prior assault and thus presenting him with an option. He states that he can either slaughter everyone present or Locke can engage him in an honorable and knightly combat. He pledges that should Locke emerge victorious in a one-on-one battle, he will withdraw at once, then will forever prevent any further assaults on Daya's skin. Locke is taken aback by this, as the Berserker ability typically strips individuals of their rationality, yet the individual remains entirely coherent. It is only at this juncture that Locke comprehends he is confronting the actual hero, Jeremy confirming his hypothesis. When the Knecht identifies himself as Hatanam, Luke acknowledges the accuracy of all the intelligence Maha provided regarding the divine span and the hero. However, that fact does not simplify the challenge of confronting his adversary. Satanta warns him against any thought of aphasia, declaring he will pursue him to the farthest reaches of the world, and engage him in battle, as he is the sole adversary who has ever approached his level. Luke understands that Satanta is not making an adulterate and is left with no alternative but to agree to the duel. Daya questions his confidence in victory love, while stalling his cannon, admits he is quite certain of defeat, remarking that if this weapon failed to even scratch Satanta, he himself wouldn't endure for even 10 seconds, a considerable duration. In his view, Daya becomes distressed upon hearing this, inquiring how Locke intends to combat an opponent he cannot overcome. He responds by explaining that he simply cannot defeat Satanta in a conventional argument. He then employs his magic to conjure a larger black rocket, informing Daya that he operates as an assassin, and intends to fight accordingly. Locke hurls the rocket outdoors, where it instantly disappears. He then requests Daya's father to accompany him, as his presence is crucial if they are to conclude this conflict through a duel. Daya's father offers to deploy all his soldiers to delay Satanta. The idea of Locke and Daya escaping is dismissed because their forces are too weak to resist, and Satanta will quickly overtake them. Locke declares his intention to eliminate Satanta, reasoning that a true hero must continuously grow stronger, and if he cannot defeat him now, he will lack the power to do so in the future. Accompanied by Daya's father, Locke approaches Satanta and accepts his challenge for a duel. Satanta expresses delight, as no one has ever agreed to face him in combat before. However, Locke is secretly bidding his team for a device he prepared early to become operational. To gain 5 minutes, Locke introduces himself with an assumed name, hoping to disorient the masked hero while discreetly checking his body for a lingering injury from the previous explosion. All of Satanta's previous wounds have healed. Locke then asks if Satanta will indeed withdraw his troops should he lose, a promise Satanta readily makes. Satanta pledges to defend the region against any aggressor, and to dispel any doubt from Locke, offers to cast a binding enchantment upon himself as proof. Locke assures him of his truth but points out that if Satanta perishes during their fight, he won't be able to honor his word. This statement greatly excites Satanta. Satanta is invigorated by Locke's directness, so matching he has encountered before. He instructs his assistant to uphold his promise if he does, further consuming valuable time. Locke then poses a question: what would happen if he were the one today? Satanta replies that in such a scenario, he would abduct Daya and slaughter everyone else. Locke asserts that they cannot permit such an outcome. The hero prepares for battle, but Locke advises him to instruct his men to retreat, preventing them from being caught in the crossfire and dying needlessly. Satanta once again complies, ordering his soldiers to fall back. Meanwhile, Locke tells Daya's father to entrust everything to him. As they prepare to fight, Locke produces a knife, intending to further confuse Satanta and gain a few more precious seconds. He boasts that the fight will conclude before Satanta can even hurl his spear. This declaration further ignites the hero's fury. Locke suggests flipping a coin, with the combat commencing the instant it touches the ground. Satanta agrees without issue. Locke intentionally tosses the coin into the sky, allowing just enough time for his planet attack to be ready as it descends. Satanta's full attention is fixed on the coin, eager to make the first move, and he fails to notice a devastating aerial assault striking him. The attack hits him squarely, triggering a massive explosion. Locke is propelled backward by the shockwave, contemplating how the duel ended long before it truly began. The attack that just struck Satanta was based on a weapon from his previous world, designed to launch heavy tungsten rods from space to Earth to end with fire this year. That weapon failed in his old world due to atmospheric resistance, but in this world, Locke could counteract it with magic. He first fashioned a heavy tungsten rod and propelled it into outer space. He utilized anti-gravity magic for launching, and applied a one-resistance spin to prevent it from incinerating upon re-entry into the atmosphere. Furthermore, he had honed his M40 skill during his earlier trip to the deserted island with Tal, ensuring his precision. All that remained was to keep Satanta occupied. He successfully stalled Satanta until the attack landed, largely owing to Satanta's excessive breathing. As luck is strong against a war with the shockwave, he realizes that even the hero could not survive such an assault, though he himself has sustained severe injuries in the process. He loses consciousness while attempting to heal himself. A few minutes later, he awakens to Daya calling his name, clearly worried about him. Locke reassures her stating Taja won the duel and she is no safe. Afterward, Locke observes that the enemy soldiers have fled. With no witnesses to her staggered assassination, Daya remarks that it does not truly matter, and then Locke, overcome with emotion, kisses her. Shortly thereafter, Locke returns home with Daya, and his parents warmly welcome her. Daya becomes an integral part of Locke's family, and life proceeds without incident. However, one day, Tian informs Locke that the true hero has emerged in their kingdom, signifying the Demon King as ascended to power. Locke is shocked to learn that Satanta was not the genuine hero and understands that his mission in this world is far from complete. This is where the video concludes.